Welcome to the House of Law. Tonight, I am going to take you somewhere simple and steady. A gentle coast, a modest lighthouse, and the quiet feeling of a place that has been itself for a long time. If you enjoy calm stories like this, you can like, subscribe, or share the House of Law. It helps the stories find the people who need them, especially at night. Now, let me begin. There is a shoreline that does not hurry. The sea arrives in small, regular motions, and then draws back again, not with any great force, not with any need to prove itself. It comes in the way breath comes, in and out, over and over. Above that shore, set a little apart from the houses and the low grass, stands a lighthouse. It is not tall in a way that demands attention. It does not rise like a monument. It is modest, built for use, not for praise. Its paint is simple, light-colored where the sun can reach it, weathered where the salt wind has done its careful work. At the base, there is stone that has learned to be patient. If you walk near it, you can see how the years have smoothed the edges. Not polished, just softened. The kind of soft that happens when the same wind visits every day and the same spray touches the same surface without anger. The path to the lighthouse is plain. Packed earth, pale gravel, a few stubborn tufts of grass that keep growing even when the ground is thin. There are no sharp turns, no surprises, just a slow approach, as if the land itself wants you to arrive without effort. And the lighthouse does what it has always done. It keeps watch, not in a tense way, not in a worried way. It simply stands and offers its light when the hour comes. In the daytime, it feels almost like an ordinary building, a small tower with a quiet purpose. The windows are not grand. The door is not dramatic. Everything about it says the same thing. I am here. I will be here. When evening settles in, the air changes. The coast grows cooler, but not cold. The colors soften. The sea turns from blue to slate, then to something darker, something that does not need a name. And then, at the top of the tower, the lamp begins its slow and faithful work. A steady light, not constant, but dependable. It turns, and with each turn, it makes a familiar pattern. A sweep across the water, a brief brightness, then a gentle dimming as it rotates away. Light, then rest, light, then rest. There is comfort in that rhythm. It does not ask you to stay alert. It does not pull you into excitement. It only reminds you that some things are designed to be repeated, and repeated again until the night is done. Nearby, there is the keeper's house, or what used to be one. It sits low against the wind, as if it has learned not to argue with the weather. Its roof is angled for rain. Its walls are thick enough to hold warmth. There may be a small garden patch, not ambitious, just practical. Herbs that can survive the salt air. A few flowers that return each year, quietly proud of their own persistence. This place has a calm sense of order. Not the strict order of rules, but the order of routine. The gate that swings the same way each time. The steps that know the weight of careful feet. The railing, cool to the touch, waiting for a hand. Even the air feels arranged, layered with sea salt, a trace of old paint, and something faintly mineral, like stone after mist. If you listen closely, you can hear the lighthouse in more ways than one, not with words, but with small sounds. A soft click, perhaps, from the mechanism that keeps the lamp turning. A low hum that you only notice when everything else grows quiet. The distant call of seabirds settling down for the night. The tide making its slow decisions along the shore. Nothing here rushes you. The lighthouse does not compete with the darkness. It simply measures it and offers a steady answer. And as I stay here with you on this gentle coast, I let the rhythm of that light slow my thoughts. One sweep across the water, one calm pause, one familiar return. The night can be wide, but it does not feel empty. Not with a lighthouse like this, not with its steady presence, its quiet routine, its simple promise to remain. For now, we can rest in that promise and let the sea breathe, while the light turns and turns. Inside the lighthouse grounds, a small home waits in the lee of the weather. It is not grand, and it does not try to be. It is built to last, built to be easy to keep. Stone that holds the day's warmth a little longer, paint that can be washed and touched up, wood that has learned the sound of wind. When I imagine stepping through the door, I do it slowly. I let the outer world remain outside for a moment, salt on the air, the cry of distant birds, the steady push of waves. Then the latch clicks and the sound changes. The inside is quieter, not silent, just softened. There is often a small entry space, a place for the practical things. Hooks for a coat, a peg for a cap, a place where a lantern can rest without danger. Boots sit near the threshold, ready to be pulled on in the dark. A mat catches sand and grit, patient and useful. Beyond that, the rooms are simple and orderly, not because someone is showing them off, but because order makes the work easier, and it makes the mind calmer, especially when the sea is restless. A narrow kitchen is usually close by. I picture a table that fits the room, not too wide, with a worn surface that has known many quiet meals. A kettle waits on the stove, the kind that can be filled in a moment. A cupboard holds cups and tins, each one returned to the same place, again and again. There is comfort in that repetition. The walls might hold a few everyday items, a clock that ticks steadily, a small calendar, perhaps a pencil tied to a string. Nothing extra, only what earns its space. Even so, the room does not feel empty. It feels prepared. Nearby, a sitting room or corner for rest. A plain chair. A lamp with a shade softened by years of light. A shelf with a handful of books, not a library, just familiar titles that can be opened at any page. Sometimes there is a radio, sometimes only the hush and the far sound of the sea. The bedroom is often the smallest space of all. A bed made neatly, a blanket folded at the foot. A narrow wardrobe, a drawer that slides with a wooden sigh, a window that shows either the yard or a strip of sky. When night comes, that window becomes a dark square, and the room feels like a safe pocket inside the larger world. Even the objects here seem to speak in a quiet way. A mug with a chip on the rim, still used. A broom with a smooth handle, shaped by hands. A notebook with careful handwriting. weather notes, supply lists, simple marks of attention. This is shelter, not only from rain and wind, but from clutter, from noise, from hurry. A small life kept within steady walls, a place where the keeper can breathe, eat, rest, then rise again, ready for the next climb and the next lamp to tend. The notebook lives in a quiet place where my hands can find it without searching. It is sturdy, the kind that does not mind being opened and closed 1,000 times. The cover has softened with use. The corners are worn. The edges are a little rough, like driftwood that has been held by water and time. When I lift it, there is a familiar weight, a steady, simple heaviness, not too precious, not too fragile. It is not meant to impress anyone. It is meant to last. Some pages carry faint marks from older days, a shadow of ink on the next sheet, or the gentle bend where the book has been folded open to the same spot. I like these small signs. They make the journal feel lived in and safe. I keep a pen with it, always, not a handful of pens, not a cup full of choices, just one that writes the way I expect it to. The pen stays in the same place every time, resting along the spine, or tucked into a loop, or laid beside the notebook as if it belongs there. This sameness is part of the comfort. When the day has been noisy, decisions can feel sharp, so I remove one decision by arranging this small corner of my life. Notebook here, pen here, nothing else required. I do not wait for inspiration. I do not ask myself if I have something important to say. I write at the same times, a few minutes in the morning when the day is still unformed, a few minutes at night when the light is lower and the rooms feel settled. The habit is gentle, not strict, but it is steady. At those times, I open to the next blank page, or to a page that has been waiting with a folded corner. Sometimes I write a simple line about what I noticed, the sound of water in pipes, the way dust turns in a sunbeam, the quiet patience of a mug cooling on the table. Sometimes I write only a list, bread, soap, a book to return. Even that counts. The journal does not demand a certain kind of entry. It only asks that I arrive and leave a small trace of my day. When I close it again, I place it back where it belongs. The pen returns to its spot, and in that small ritual, the room seems to soften, as if the house itself understands that this is how calm is kept. One familiar object, one steady place, one repeated moment at a time. The first thing I notice is the order, how the hand that wrote these pages never rushes the beginning. Each entry starts the same way, a date, then a time, not hidden in a corner, not guessed later, but placed at the top with quiet care. It is written like a small anchor, something to hold the moment in place. March 3rd, 8001 in the evening. June 14th, just after dawn. Some times are exact to the minute, others are softer, written as near midnight or close to 4. I let my eyes rest on those simple lines, date, time, and then a short pause before the next sentence. It feels like the writer is taking one calm breath before speaking. After that, there is almost always a note about the weather. Not a forecast, not a warning, just a small observation. Like the kind you might say to yourself at a window, with your hand on the latch. Clear sky, cool air. Light rain, steady and fine. Clouds low, the day dim but gentle. Sometimes it is only a few words, sometimes a full sentence, still simple. The wind moved the leaves for an hour, then settled. Even when the weather sounds rough on the page, the tone stays even, no urgency, no sharp edges. Just the surface of the day, noted and placed neatly beside the date. I think about why that matters, how a record becomes easier to trust when it begins with things that do not argue. Time, weather, the plain facts of being in a moment. There is comfort in that steadiness. And the voice of the entries. It does not change much. It does not lift when something pleasant happens, and it does not sink when something goes wrong. It stays level, as if the writer made an agreement with the page. To speak, gently. To stay clear. To keep every day the same size, at least here, in ink. I can almost hear the small sounds that would go with it. A pen cap set down, paper shifting under a resting wrist, the faint scratch of a nib moving slowly across the grain. Date, time, a line about the sky, a line about the air. Then, whatever comes next, it makes me read more slowly, because the beginning trains my mind to settle. It tells me there is no need to hurry. Nothing here will shout. Only quiet marks, laid down in a steady way, entry after entry, like footsteps that do not change pace. And as I sit with those openings, I notice something else. The writer does not try to capture everything, just enough to begin. Enough to say, this is when I was here. This is what the world felt like outside the door. Now, I will write. The first light always arrives gently here, before the sun shows itself. The water has its own color, a quiet slate, almost soft, and the horizon looks like a thin line drawn with care. I like to watch it from the lantern room window for a moment, not to think, only to notice. The glass is cool beneath my fingertips. There is often a faint salt film that gathers overnight, nothing dramatic, just the sea leaving its signature. I take a cloth from the shelf and wipe in slow circles, one pane, then the next. When I am finished, the world outside looks a little clearer, as if the day has been polished. I check the lamp the same way each morning, by habit more than worry. I look for soot where it should not be. I make sure the fittings sit where they belong, and I listen. A lighthouse has its own small sounds, the settling of metal, the light tap of something warming, the hush of air moving through narrow spaces. Then I go down the stairs, measured steps, one hand on the rail. The tower always smells of stone and old paint, with a hint of oil that never fully leaves. At the bottom, I pause at the logbook. The pages are thick and slightly rough, and the pen sits in its place like it has been waiting. I write the date, the time, a short note about the weather. Wind light, sea calm, visibility good. There is comfort in these simple lines. They do not ask for more than they are. Next comes the practical work, small tasks that happen in order. I check the door latches, one, then the other. I look at the hinges for salt crust, and if I see it, I brush it away. I test the radio, not for conversation, only for readiness. I make sure the signal is there, like a distant neighbor quietly awake. Outside, the path around the base of the tower is pale with sand. I walk it slowly, listening to my footsteps change from stone to gravel to packed earth. Sometimes a bird calls out over the water, a single sound, then silence again. The light on the sea becomes warmer as minutes pass, not bright yet, but honest. It spreads across the surface in a long band, and the small ripples catch it like scattered coins. When I return inside, I fill the kettle. The click of the stove is familiar. While the water warms, I tidy what can be tidied, fold a cloth, set tools back in their places, straighten the chair by the table. Then I pour the tea and sit where I can see the water. Morning does not rush here. It arrives in stages, and I let it. The same beginning each day, and somehow it never feels exactly the same, only steady, only kind. The morning light comes in without hurry, pale and even, as if it has learned the shape of this house. I keep my tea warm in my hands for a moment before I begin. Not to delay, only to settle. The cup is simple. The steam is soft, and the day feels clean around the edges. When the tea is set down, I take the small notebook from its usual place. It is not grand work, what I do here. It is the kind of care that keeps a place steady, the kind that asks for calm attention. I go to the base of the tower stairs, and I pause there. The steps rise in a narrow curve. The stone has been worn smooth by years of quiet use. My hand finds the rail, cool and familiar. I climb slowly, one step, then the next, letting my breathing stay easy. The light changes as I go up, shifting from the wide morning glow below to a thinner brightness that slips between narrow openings. At a turn in the stairs, I stop, just long enough to listen. Nothing urgent. Only the small noises of a house waking, wood settling, air moving. Higher up, the door to the lantern room waits. I open it with care. The hinges give a soft sound, and then the space is still again. The lantern is here. The lens and its fittings, the metal frame, the small points where screws and brackets hold the whole thing true. I do not rush. First, I look at the lens itself. I let my eyes travel across its surface, checking for dust, for a thin film, for any mark that does not belong. In the morning light it is easier to see the faint things, the small smudges that could scatter light later on. I take a clean cloth, and I wipe in slow circles. Nothing hard, nothing sharp, just steady contact until the glass looks clear again. Then I check the fittings. I touch each fastener lightly, not to tighten blindly, only to feel if anything has loosened with time and temperature. A bracket that shifts even a little, a screw that is backed off by a turn, these are small troubles that prefer to be found early. I look at the frame where metal meets metal, where salt air might leave a trace, where a hinge might ask for a drop of oil. If I find anything, I note it. The notebook is part of the ritual. Date, time, weather, a few simple lines. Lens wiped. Fittings sound. No cracks seen. It is not poetry, but it is its own kind of comfort. A record that says someone was here, paying attention. I make one more slow circle of the room, letting my eyes rest on each corner. I check that nothing has been left out of place. I close the small access panel. I make sure the latch is seated. Then, I stand at the tower window for a brief moment. The world below is quiet, roofs and trees and the faint line of the path. Morning continues on its steady course, and the lantern room holds its calm readiness. When I turn to go, I close the door gently behind me. The steps down feel easier. My hand stays on the rail. My pace stays unhurried. By the time I reach the lower floor, the tea has cooled a little, but it is still good. I lift the cup again, and in the notebook I add one last small mark, a simple confirmation that the tower has been checked and the light will be true when it is needed. Pa. The stair turns again, and again, each step a small, patient rise. The tower holds its own kind of quiet. Not the quiet of a closed room, but the quiet of height, where even small sounds thin out. My hand stays on the rail. It is cool beneath my fingers and slightly rough where old varnish has worn away. Up here, the light is not a thing to admire from a distance. It is a tool, and, like any tool, it asks for simple care. I pause on a landing where a narrow window looks out across the dark. The glass has a faint haze to it. Nothing urgent, nothing troubling. Just the ordinary film that gathers when days pass, and air moves, and hands touch the sill without thinking. Keeping surfaces clean is not a grand task. It begins with noticing, then choosing one small action. I take a cloth from my pocket. It is plain cotton, soft from use. I wipe the window in slow lines, not fast, not hard, just enough pressure to lift the dust. The cloth makes a quiet sound, almost like a whisper, and when I draw back my hand, the view is a little clearer. At the next step, I find the lantern shelf and the lantern itself waiting where it always waits. I do not rush toward it. I set my hands on the table first, feeling for grit. A few grains of dust, a dry edge of soot. I wipe the shelf in a wide circle, then a smaller one, until the wood feels even. The lantern has panes of glass and metal ribs that hold them in place. I clean the glass with the same cloth, folding to a fresh corner when I need to. I watch the surface change from dull to calm. Not shining like a jewel, just clean enough to let light pass without interference. Simple care continues with parts sitting as they should. I check the little door on the lantern. It closes with a gentle click if the hinge is aligned. Tonight it meets the frame cleanly. I touch the latch. It rests flat, not crooked. I press once, then let it go. I loosen a small ring at the base, only a quarter turn, to be sure it is seated correctly. Then I set it back. The motion is smooth, like turning the lid on a jar that has been opened many times. Inside, the wick holder sits in its track. I lift it slightly, then let it settle. It sits straight. No wobble, no strain. None of this is meant to be perfect. It is meant to be steady. And then, the notes. In the tower, I keep a small book, Not a ledger full of heavy judgment, just a place to lay down details so my mind does not have to hold them through the night. I open it to a page with wide lines. I write the date. I write what I did in a few quiet words. Window wiped, shelf cleaned, glass cleaned, latch aligned, wick seated. That is enough. I do not search for more to add. I do not ask the notes to prove anything. I simply set down what is true and let it stay on the page. If I notice something small, I write it without worry. A faint soot line on the upper rim. Cloth nearly worn through at the edge. These are not problems. They are just details, like pebbles placed in a row, so they cannot be lost. When the book is closed again, the tower feels lighter, as if the air itself has been tidied. I stand with the lantern before lighting it, just for a moment. The clean glass looks softly empty. The metal holds still. The parts sit where they should. And my thoughts, too, begin to sit a little more quietly. Then I set the lantern back on its shelf, ready for when it is needed, and I let the calm of small tasks settle over the stairs, one slow breath at a time. Thedge. The page in front of me is plain. A few ruled lines, a date, an hour, and space enough to describe what the world is doing outside. This is one of the quiet duties of the light, to notice. Not to worry at the weather, not to argue with it, only to set it down as it is, so a later reader can understand the night. I take a moment before I write. The wind is the first thing I consider, because it touches everything. It leans on the glass. It finds the cracks around the frame. It makes a low voice in the railings. I name it simply. Light airs when it is only a movement on the skin. A steady breeze when it keeps its direction and holds to it. A stronger wind when the tower gives a small answer. A gentle shiver that passes through the iron. I do not need poetry for it. The truth is restful enough. Then the clouds. I look up and let my eyes take their time. A clean sky is easy to write, and a crowded one is not much harder if I do not hurry. Clear when the stars show without effort. Scattered when there are gaps and the moon comes and goes. Overcast when the whole ceiling is drawn shut. Sometimes the cloud has layers, a low sheet sliding along, with higher patches drifting the other way. I note it without judgment, as if I were describing shelves in a pantry. After that, the sea. From the lantern gallery, the water does not look like a single thing. It looks like many small movements joining into one surface. When it is calm, it is a dark plate with faint lines, the slow breathing of a tide. When there is a breeze, the surface roughens and the light catches in little scales here and there. When it is choppy, the pattern breaks into short ridges and the sound becomes busier. And when there is swell, the waves are longer, lifting and lowering with patience. The sea can be restless and still be steady. I write what I see in simple terms: smooth, slight, moderate, rough. If there is spray in the air, I add that too, because it tells a story about the wind and the distance it has traveled. Finally, visibility. This matters more than most things, and it is best to state it calmly. Good, when the far marks are clear and honest. Moderate, when the horizon softens and details begin to fade. Poor, when the sea and sky seem to merge, and even near sounds feel far away. In haze, I note the color of it, a pale milkiness, or a thin blue veil. In rain, I write the kind, light, steady, squally. And if fog comes, I do not fight it. I only name it and measure what I can, the nearest buoy, the nearest rock line, the nearest rock line, the nearest known shape. Each note is a small lamp of its own, not bright, not loud, just steady. A record made for safety, but also, in its quiet way, a record made for peace, because when I put the weather into words, I stop carrying it in my chest. It becomes something outside me again. Wind, cloud, sea, and the reach of my own eyes. And in that simple order, the night feels settled, even if the water is moving, even if the sky is closed. I set down the pencil. I listen once more. Then I look at the lamp glass, still clean, still clear, and I let the steady beam do what it was made to do. Double, 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 double. The lighthouse is never fully silent, even when the lantern is dimmed and the stairs are still. Outside, the sea keeps its own steady work. Waves arrive, lift and fall away again, not hurried, not delayed. Some strike rock with a blunt sound, others slide into shingle with a softer hush like a long exhale. When the wind turns, the water changes its voice. The same shore can sound close and full one night, then distant and thin the next. I listen for the birds too, not the sharp ones that feel like daylight, but the ones that belong to the edges of sleep. Far out, a call crosses the dark and fades, and a moment later another answers. Sometimes there is only the suggestion of wings, a brief brushing sound above the surf. The birds do not explain themselves. They pass, and the night accepts them. Inside the tower, thick walls do a quiet kind of holding. Stone and mortar take the roughness out of the world. The wind becomes a low pressure, more felt than heard. The surf arrives as a muted rhythm, a distant pulse that tells me the sea is still there, still moving, still shaping the coast. In the keeper's rooms the quiet has layers. There is the small click of cooling metal, the faint tick of a clock that does not demand attention, the soft complaint of wood as it settles. Even my own steps change on the floorboards, louder near the door, softer near the inner wall where the stone keeps everything close. I have come to think of these sounds as another kind of weather line, written not in ink, but in the margin of the night. When I open the log, I note the practical things: wind direction, sea state, visibility. Yet the ear keeps its own ledger. A heavier surf means the barometer has shifted. A sudden quiet on the water can mean fog even before it arrives at the glass. Some keepers wrote only numbers. Others added small observations, a phrase about the moan of the wind or the way the gulls kept calling past midnight. These are not decorations. They are part of the record. Sound is evidence of distance and pressure, of season and tide. When I write, I let my hand move slowly. I leave space. In that space, I place what I heard, not as poetry, not as drama, just as truth. Surf loud at the North Rocks, birds calling far out, interior calm, and beneath it all the steady breathing of the tower itself. A lighthouse is built to be seen, but it is also built to be heard, not only by ships, but by the person who keeps watch. The world speaks in small waves of sound, and the walls answer by making them gentle. So I sit a little longer, listening, letting the night arrange its own order. And when the pen rests again, the page holds more than words. It holds the shape of the hour, the way the sea sounded, and how quiet can still be full. By midday, the light sits higher, not harsh, just clear, and it lays a calm order over the coast. I take my time with the small tasks that keep a place steady. Not the grand work, just the simple kind that prevents trouble later. A loose latch, a hinge that sighs when it moves, a hook that has begun to lean. I start at the door, because the door is the first promise of shelter. I open it slowly and listen. The sea is there in the background, patient and even. I tighten the screws with small turns, stopping when the wood tells me it is enough. No forcing, no rushing. Then I move along the wall where the salt air likes to linger. I run my fingers over the boards, feeling for rough places. If I find a splintered edge, I smooth it with a strip of sandpaper, steady strokes, the sound soft as dry leaves. When the surface feels kind again, I wipe away the dust with a cloth. I keep a small tin of oil for metal, and I use only a little. A drop on the hinge. A thin smear on a latch. I work it in, then wipe the excess away so it will not gather grit. The motion is slow and careful, like tending a quiet lamp. After that, I check supplies, not with worry, just with simple attention. I open the cupboard. I count candles. I look at the matches and make sure they are dry. I feel the weight of the lantern and give it a gentle shake to hear if anything is loose. I take stock of food in plain terms. What is there? What should be used first? A jar of oats. A small sack of flour. Tea in a tin that still smells bright when I lift the lid. I set the older things toward the front, the newer toward the back, an easy order that makes later choices feel effortless. Water is next. I check the container, the lid seated well, no cracks, no grit around the rim. I rinse a cup and set it upside down to dry, letting the air do its quiet work. Outside, I walk where the ground is uneven, and I move slowly on purpose. One careful step, then another. I watch for slick stones, for seaweed where it should not be, for boards that might tilt underfoot. If I find something unstable, I correct it simply. I shift a plank. I wedge a stone. I clear a small path. There is a calm satisfaction in this, not excitement, just steadiness. The coast keeps its rhythm, and I match it. When I am done, I wash my hands, and I look once more around the room. Nothing perfect, only cared for. The kind of readiness that lets the afternoon pass in peace, with the sea continuing its low, even voice beyond the walls. The middle of the day in the House of Law does not announce itself with bells. It simply arrives. I notice it first in my hands, in the small stiffness that comes after steady work. Not pain, just a quiet reminder that time has been passing in its usual way. Meals here are not performances. They are simple, and they are repeated. I find comfort in that. I set a pot on the stove and do what has been done 100 times before. Water, a pinch of salt, a slow flame. I rinse a few vegetables. Nothing rare, nothing complicated. Just what keeps well and what tastes like the season outside. There is a wooden board that has softened over the years. When I place it on the counter, it settles with a familiar weight, like it belongs exactly there. I cut slowly, not because I must, but because I can. The knife makes a mild, steady sound. Tap, then a pause. Tap, then a pause. Sometimes I add oats to a bowl. Sometimes bread warmed near the heat. Sometimes a thin soup that asks for patience rather than skill. I do not chase new flavors. I return to the ones that feel kind. As the pot warms, I wipe the counter in long strokes. One direction, then the other. It is not urgent. It is only a small act of care for a space that gives me shelter. When the food is ready, I do not carry it far. The table is close. The chair is already waiting. I sit. At first, I simply let my shoulders drop, and I feel the way the chair holds me without complaint. I do not reach for anything else. No task, no list, just the quiet truth that I am allowed to rest. I take a bite. Then I set the spoon down. I breathe. The steam rises and fades. The room stays gentle. Outside, the day continues on its own. Inside, I mark a smaller time, measured by warmth and chewing and the soft pause between sips. There is comfort in eating the same meal prepared the same way. It tells me I have returned to myself again, to the ordinary place where nothing needs to be proven. After a while, I notice small details I might otherwise miss. The faint grain of the table, a line in the ceramic bowl, the way light sits on the floor as if it has decided to stay. When I am finished, I do not hurry to stand. I let the last taste linger. I let the quiet gather. Then, slowly, I rise. I rinse the bowl. I set it to dry. And for a moment longer, I remain in the kitchen doing nothing at all, listening to the house breathe around me. In these ordinary moments, comfort is not a grand thing. It is a small thing done steadily and with care. The plain meal is finished now, and the quiet that follows it feels like a small room of its own. I sit without hurrying. I let the last warmth of the cup fade in my hands. In this house, even an ordinary table seems to understand the hour, as if the wood remembers countless afternoons that slowly became evening. Beyond the window, the light has begun to change, not suddenly, not in a way that calls for notice. It simply shifts, a little at a time. The bright white of earlier hours softens into something gentler. Colors lose their sharp edges. The world looks as if it has been lightly dusted with flour, muted, calm, and easy to take in. I watch how the sky behaves when no one asks it to perform. A pale blue rests above the rooftops, but it is thinner now, as though it has been stretched. Near the horizon, a faint wash of warmer color gathers, not quite gold, not quite peach. It is subtle enough that I could doubt it if I did not keep my gaze steady. The shadows lengthen with patient certainty. A fence post throws a line across the grass that was not there before. The corner of the garden bed becomes a darker shape. Even the small stones seem to gain weight as their shaded sides grow. Inside, the same thing happens in quieter ways. The light that comes through the glass shifts its angle, and the floorboards take on a different pattern. The bright patch on the wall slides down and away, as if it is looking for a place to rest. I notice how this slow movement makes time feel wider, as though the afternoon has more room than a clock would admit. Nothing needs to be decided right now. Nothing needs to be improved. I rise and carry the dishes to the sink, not to rush through a task, but to let my hands do something simple. Water runs. A soft clink of ceramic. The smallest sounds become part of the calm. When I return, the air has changed again. It is the same temperature, but it feels different on the skin, like a message delivered without words. The day is turning. The sky is preparing its quieter colors. Outside, a branch stirs and settles. The leaves show two shades at once, one bright where the light still touches, and one deep where shadow has arrived. The world is practicing its evening posture. I sit where I can watch it all, and I do not ask for anything more. The afternoon light continues to drift. Soft shifts in color, lengthening shadows, and a gradual turn toward evening. The afternoon sky keeps moving, but the shoreline beneath it feels steady. I let my attention settle on the familiar landmarks that seem to hold the edge of the water in place. Rocks that have been there longer than my memory, a thin seam of grass that starts where the sand gives up, and a path that curves as if it learned the shape of my footsteps. Some shores change quickly, tides rearrange little stones, storms pull at the line between land and sea. But here there is a small view that rarely changes, at least not in any way that asks for concern. A cluster of rocks sits just offshore, dark and rounded, their surfaces smoothed by years of patient waves. On calm days they look like quiet backs rising from the water, and on brighter days they take on a gentle sheen, as if the light has decided to rest there. Closer in, the stones are smaller, scattered along the margin where foam fades. I imagine how they feel underfoot, cool, firm, unhurried. Each one is a simple shape, nothing to solve. Behind the beach, the grass begins in a soft, uneven line, growing around low patches of soil and small roots. It has its own slow rhythm, bending when the breeze comes, returning when it passes. The green is never exactly the same from day to day, but it stays within the same familiar range, like a well-known song played quietly. The path is narrow and worn, a light ribbon through the grass. It does not need signs. It only needs to be itself, a route repeated so often that it has become gentle. I picture it leading past a few steady markers, a pale stone with a flat top, a weathered post that leans slightly, a dip in the ground where rainwater sometimes gathers, then dries. When I look at scenery like this, I feel how comfort can come from what does not demand attention. The rocks do not tell me new stories, they simply remain. The grass does not hurry toward the future, it just grows where it can. The path does not argue with the landscape, it accepts it. Even the horizon, far out and quiet, has a dependable line to it, a place for the mind to rest its weight. Clouds slide slowly across that line, changing the color of the water, then moving on. I stay with this small view, the shoreline and its familiar landmarks, letting the steadiness of it settle into me. It is enough to know where things are, and to trust that they will be there again, in the same patient arrangement when the afternoon light shifts once more. The shore looks the same as it did earlier, and also a little different. Light changes quietly as the hours move on. The water keeps its steady habits, rolling in, easing out, leaving a thin shine on the sand. I let my eyes rest on those familiar shapes. A low line of dunes, a scatter of stones, the curve where the beach narrows and the reeds begin. I take my time preparing for dusk, not in a hurried way, more like the way you set a book back on a shelf, making sure it sits square and safe. First, I gather what I know I will want later. A small lantern with a simple handle checked for fuel. A box of matches kept dry in a tin. A folded cloth that can serve as a towel or a wrap if the air cools faster than expected. I pick up a length of cord, not much, just enough to tie a bundle or hang something if I need to. I add a little notebook and a pencil, not because I must write, but because it is comforting to have the option. A warm drink in a closed flask, a piece of bread wrapped in paper, and a few plain things that keep well. Each item has a place. I lay them out, then pack them again, slowly. It is a small ritual. It makes the moment feel settled. Before evening arrives, I do a final check. I look at the sky first, not searching for anything dramatic, just noticing. The clouds, if there are any, are stretched thin. The wind is mild. The edge of the horizon is clear enough to read like a simple line. Then I check my footing, where the sand is firm, where it gives way. I note the darker patches that mean damp ground. I look at the waterline and how far it has traveled up the beach. I watch one full set of waves, counting the slow rhythm, so I can sense how the tide is behaving. I glance back toward where I came from, and then toward where I might walk later. Landmarks matter more in low light. A tall, angled rock, a pale driftwood trunk, a seam in the dunes where grass grows thicker. I test the lantern. A brief flame, then closed again. Enough to know it will work when I ask it to. The checks are simple, and because they are simple, they bring calm. When everything is in order, there is a soft feeling of readiness. Not excitement, not tension, just the quiet sense that I have what I need, and that I have looked where I should look. The shoreline keeps offering familiar views, the same meeting of water and land, the same patient motion. I let it remind me that evening does not need to be faced, it can be met. I take one more slow scan of my bundle, the flask, the tin of matches, the cloth, the notebook. I settle the strap in my hand. Then I stand still for a moment, listening to the sea and letting the coming dusk feel ordinary and manageable and close. Na, 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 na. And close. Na, na. Dusk settles into the corners of the house in a slow, patient way, not all at once, but in gentle layers. I notice it first in the window glass, the faint loss of color, the way the world outside becomes simpler. The far trees turn into a single shape. The path becomes a pale ribbon, and then, gradually, it begins to disappear. This is the moment I like best for small, careful work, the kind that does not ask for much thinking, only attention. I bring the lantern closer to me and set it down where my hands can rest beside it, steady and unhurried. For a little while, I just look at it, as if I am listening with my eyes. The metal is cool. The glass is clean enough to see through, though it holds a faint haze from other evenings. There is a comfort in that, the quiet evidence of repetition. I check the fuel, slowly. I loosen the cap and pause. The scent is mild and familiar, like an old tool chest or a shed where wood has been kept dry. I do not rush. I fill only what is needed, no more than that. Then I tighten the cap again and wipe away the smallest trace from the rim. Next comes the wick. I turn the little wheel until the wick rises just a little, only a thin edge like the first line of day on the horizon. Too much, and the flame will hurry and smoke. Too little, and it will struggle. I aim for the middle place, the calm place. I close the glass door with a soft click, and for a moment, everything is still. Lantern. Hands. Quiet room. Then I take a match. The match head waits, small and plain. I strike it gently. There is a brief rasp. Then the tiny flare. I hold it steady, letting it become sure of itself. I open the lantern door again and guide the flame in, careful not to bump the wick. The wick catches with a soft, almost shy light, a small glow that trembles once, then settles. I close the door, and now the lantern begins its work. At first the light is modest. It does not try to fill the room. It simply makes a warm circle, and in that circle, details return. The table edge becomes clear. The grain of the wood shows itself again. A shadow falls behind the lantern, long and gentle, stretching without any sharpness. I adjust the wick by the smallest turn. The flame rises and steadies. The glass gathers a faint warmth. The lantern makes its quiet sound, nothing loud, just a soft, private presence. This is a sequence I have done many times, and that is why it feels restful. Fuel, wick, match, light, each step in its own place. As the evening deepens, the lantern does not compete with the dark. It simply lives beside it. The room becomes a calm arrangement of light and shadow, the kind of scene that asks nothing from me. I carry the lantern slowly, one careful step at a time, letting the light travel ahead. It brushes the wall, finds a framed picture, catches the curve of a door handle, then moves on. The house seems to soften as it is lit this way, as if the lantern reminds every object to be quiet. When I set it down again, I choose a spot where it can be seen without being stared at, near enough to warm the space, far enough to feel gentle. I sit for a moment and let the light do what it does best, remain steady. Outside, the last edge of daylight lets go. Inside, the lantern holds its small sun, patient and calm, a simple companion for the evening ahead. The lantern comes to life in a quiet way, not with any sudden flare, not with a crackle of impatience. It simply steadies itself and holds a small circle of light. Tonight, I keep watch in the gentlest manner I know. I do not try to conquer the dark. I only keep company with it. In the house of law, Night watches are made of short checks at regular times, not long vigils that strain the eyes, just a simple rhythm. I choose a pattern I can remember without effort. A glance, then rest. A glance, then rest. Sometimes it is the same minute on the clock. Sometimes it is when the room feels still enough to notice. The lantern helps by giving me a calm point to return to. Its light does not reach for the corners. It does not demand that I search. It only offers enough to see what is near. When I make a check, I keep it small. I look at the latch, the window line, the way the curtain hangs, the edge of the table. I let my eyes move slowly, like a hand passing over a page. Looking out without strain means I do not stare. I do not squint. I do not lean forward and tighten my shoulders. Instead, I soften my focus. I notice shapes more than details. The larger story of the room. A chair remains a chair. A shadow remains a shadow. Nothing has to become more than it is. If I look toward the glass, I let the outside stay outside. A dark garden, a quiet street, a pale strip of sky. I do not hunt for movement. I only confirm the peace that is already there. Then I return. To the lantern, to the steady patch of light. And when it feels right, I write a note, not a paragraph, not a tale, just a brief, simple mark. Time, observation, done. I keep the notes plain, like stones placed along a path. 12,020, latch closed. 12,003, windlight. 12,003, windlight. 12,003, all still. If there is nothing to add, I do not add anything. A blank line can be its own record. These notes are not meant to prove anything. They are meant to soothe the mind. Because the mind likes gentle certainty. It likes to know that someone looked, and that nothing needed to change. Between checks, I let my body settle, shoulders loose, hands resting, breath unforced. The lantern stays awake for me, so I can stay quiet. And each time I rise for a small look, I do it as though I am trying not to disturb the air. A soft step, a calm turn. I notice how the light slides across the floorboards, how it finds the grain in the wood, how it makes the room feel held. In this way, the night watch becomes a kind of gentle observation. Not a task, not a test, just a simple practice, short checks, easy seeing, small notes. The lantern remains steady, and I let the rest be steady too. The journal keeps its own kind of time. Not the quick time of clocks and deadlines, but the slow time of lamplight, and the steady breathing of a house at rest. On these pages, I begin to notice the calm repeating patterns, the phrases that return as reliably as evening, as if the ink itself has learned a gentle routine. Most nights start the same way. Lantern trimmed, door latched, ashes banked. Not always those exact words, but close enough that my mind starts to anticipate them, and when they appear, it feels like finding the same familiar stone on a path, the one my foot expects and trusts. There is comfort in that predictability, not because nothing changes, but because the change has a frame around it. The writer notes the temperature in simple terms, mild, cool, a little sharp. Then the sounds. Owls at the far hedge. Wind in the eaves. Rain beginning, then stopping. The night is recorded in small pieces, each one calm, each one placed where it has been placed before. And between these repeated lines there is often a short pause, sometimes just a dot, sometimes a blank space left on purpose. I find myself reading those silences too, letting them do their work. A steady record like this does not hurry me. Even when something unusual appears, it arrives softly, nested inside the same structure. Lantern trimmed, door latched, footsteps one set, then none, ashes banked. The pattern holds, and because it holds, the strange line does not feel sharp. It feels like a leaf floating past on slow water. Some entries end with a small inventory. Keys returned. Water set by the bed. Curtain tied. Sometimes the writer repeats a phrase as if it were a charm. All is in order. It appears again, and the more I see it, the more I understand. It is not a declaration meant to impress anyone. It is a gentle reassurance offered to the page and maybe to the person holding the pen. The journal does not argue with the night. It meets the night with routine, like a quiet handshake, the same pressure, the same warmth each time. And as I read, my own thoughts start to line up, becoming simpler. Lantern, door, ashes, wind, owls, rain. A house is a pattern too. Boards and beams repeating, stairs that rise the same way each day, a latch that clicks with the same small certainty. The writer seems to know that the mind relaxes when it can predict a few things, when it can rest on familiar words. So, the journal offers them, not as a story racing forward, but as a calm circle drawn again each night, a slow orbit of ordinary details. I linger on one particular sequence that repeats in different forms. Walked the boundary, noted the gate, listened at the orchard. Sometimes it is the garden instead of the orchard, sometimes it is the pond, but always there is a boundary, always a gate, always listening. It is night watch in quiet intervals. Check and return. Listen and let it pass. Write and set the pen down. What might have been lonely becomes steady, almost like rocking. A sentence begins the same way, and my breathing begins to match it. At the first hour, then later, at the second hour, a simple progression, like the turning of pages. Not every hour is filled with meaning, and that is part of what makes it soothing. Some hours are recorded only as nothing to report. Those words are not empty. They are a soft blanket pulled up over the mind, permission not to search, permission to let the dark be only dark, and the quiet be only quiet. The journal also returns to the same small signs of morning. Hinge stiff with dew. First bird, then another. Light at the edge of the curtain. It feels like a promise kept, not with excitement, but with gentle consistency. And as my eyes move from line to line, I realize this repetition is not boredom. It is care. It is the writer tending the same duties, not because they must, but because the tending itself steadies the world. Even the handwriting reflects it, the letters shaped in familiar ways, the same loops, the same pauses, as though the hand knows where to rest. When I reach the end of an entry, there is often a final phrase, settle in, or rest now, not said to anyone in particular, just placed there, like turning down a lamp. I hold that feeling for a moment, the sense that the night can be measured without being disturbed, that it can be witnessed without being fought. And in the quiet repetition of these pages, I can feel my own thoughts becoming orderly, like books returned to a shelf, one by one, until there is nothing left to lift. I moved slowly through the lower hall, letting the boards speak in their soft, patient way. Not loud, not demanding. Just a small sound that reminded me where I was. In the sitting room, a lamp was already lit. Its shade turned the light into something gentle and honey-colored, a small circle that did not try to chase every shadow away. It simply made a place to rest my eyes. The chairs held their shapes in the stillness. The table waited with nothing urgent on it. Even the air felt warm in a steady, private way, as if the house had been keeping a little heat for me. I sat down and let my hands loosen. For a while, I did nothing at all. I listened to the quiet that comes after the day is finished, the quiet that is not empty, only complete. Then I reached for the tower notes. The packet was tied with a plain string, not decorative, just practical. When I unwrapped it, the paper gave a dry, calming sound. A reminder of ink, of margins, of patient work. I took a final look through what I had gathered. A few sketches of stones and corners, the way a stair turned, the way a window held the night. Short lines where I had tried to describe the feeling of standing there, how the tower did not insist on being understood all at once. Some of the notes were only fragments, a sentence that ended early. A small list of details, lamp soot near the ceiling, a draught at the third landing, the faint scent of old lime plaster. I did not correct anything. I did not try to make it perfect. I only read and let it be what it was. There was a kind of comfort in unfinished handwriting, in the evidence of a mind that was simply paying attention. I stacked the pages again, tapped their edges until they aligned, and tied the string back in place. Just that simple action, straighten, stack, tie, felt like closing a drawer gently. I set the notes aside on the table where the lamplight could touch them without glare. The rooms remained still. Somewhere deeper in the house, the warmth moved through hidden passages, quiet as breath. The night beyond the glass stayed dark, but not harsh. The windows reflected the lamp, turning the room into a small island of light. I noticed the familiar things again, the shape of the chair arms, the calm weight of the rug, the faint difference between the cooler air near the floor and the warmer air near the lamp. Patterns that feel familiar do not ask for attention. They offer it. I let my shoulders drop a little more. I let my breathing slow, as if it could match the slow pace of the house. Nothing needed solving now. Nothing needed improving. The tower could remain what it was. A place with its own quiet logic. A place I could return to in memory without stirring the rest of the night. I stayed with the lamplight a bit longer, letting my eyes soften, letting my thoughts move more slowly, like pages turning on their own. Then, Without hurrying, I began to drift toward rest, not as a sudden change, but as a gentle continuation, the way the last hour of evening naturally becomes sleep. I am still at the small desk, with the journal open in front of me. The page holds the last lines I wrote tonight. The ink has had time to dry, and the words look calm now. Not urgent, just placed there. For a moment, I do one last, brief check of the time. Not to measure myself against it, not to bargain with it, only to notice. The hands of the clock have moved on, as they always do. The day has finished most of its turning, and the night has taken over the rooms, gently, without making a sound. I let my eyes rest on the journal again. There is nothing else I need to add. If anything is unfinished, it can stay unfinished. If anything is unclear, it can remain unclear. The page does not demand perfection. It only holds what I chose to set down. I take the pen between my fingers, and I pause with it. It is a simple object, but it has done its work for the day. I place the cap on carefully, with a small, quiet click that feels like a final punctuation mark. Then I set the pen where it belongs, straightened neatly beside the journal, not tossed aside, not abandoned. I smooth the edge of the paper with my palm, not to change what I wrote, only to feel the texture of it, to acknowledge that it is real and now complete. Then I close the journal. The cover meets the pages softly. No slam, no sharp sound. Just a gentle closing, like drawing a curtain. I keep my hand resting on the cover for a few breaths. In this stillness, I can sense the house around me, the patient walls, the muted furniture, the dark windows that reflect a dim interior light. Everything looks slightly simpler at night, as if the details have been politely reduced. I do not try to review the whole day. I do not try to solve it. I let it settle without effort, like snow settling on a quiet street, like dust settling after a book has been closed. A thought drifts by, then passes. A small memory rises, then softens. I do not hold them tightly. I do not push them away. I let them be, and let them move on. The journal is closed now, and that helps my mind understand something simple. This part is done. Whatever else remains can wait in silence. I slide the journal slightly forward on the desk, aligning it with the edge, the way a careful keeper of a house might. I like the feeling of things being in their place, especially at night. It is not strictness, it is kindness. I sit for another moment, listening. There is the faintest sound of the building, a soft settling of wood, a quiet breath of air through a hallway. The house does what it has always done, holding its rooms steady, holding their stories without speaking. And I let my own breathing match that steadiness, in and out, slow enough to feel. There is nothing I need to chase now, only the simple act of easing toward rest, one small movement at a time, with no hurry. The last pages settle, and the cover closes with a gentle finality. I let my hands rest, as if the book can keep watch on its own now. Outside, the lighthouse continues to do what it has always done. It does not hurry. It does not doubt. It stands in its place and sends its patient beam across the dark water. A steady light, then the soft turn away. Again, a steady light, Nothing in it asks for effort. Nothing in it demands a response. It is simply there, dependable and kind in its consistency. I notice my breathing without changing it. Air in, quiet and cool. Air out, long and untroubled. Each breath seems to loosen something small. A thought that had been held too tightly. A planning mind that had been working past its hour. A tiny knot behind the eyes. The lighthouse keeps turning, and my attention can turn with it, slowly, without needing to go anywhere. If a thought arrives, I let it pass like a faint shape at the edge of the shore. I do not follow it down the beach. I do not ask where it came from. I let it be a simple thing that moves on. In the quiet, the room feels safe. The walls do not shift. The night does not press in. It only settles, like a blanket that knows the shape of the body. I listen for the smallest sounds, the far hush of the sea, the almost silence between one breath and the next. The lighthouse light returns and slides away again, steady, certain, as if it is marking time in a language older than words. My shoulders drop a little more, my jaw softens, my hands become heavier and comfortable. Even the space behind my thoughts grows wider, as if there is no need to fill it. The day can fade now. Not abruptly, not with a snap, but with the slow dimming of a lamp turned down by a careful hand. I allow the mind to do less. I allow the body to do what it already knows. Breath in, breath out. And the lighthouse, calm and dependable, keeps its gentle distance. The scene stays quiet. The scene stays safe. And in that steady rhythm, I can drift without effort into sleep.